The Great Secret or Occultism Unveiled, by Eliphas Levi. Part 1. The Royal Mystery or the Art of Subduing the Powers. Chapter 1. Universal Magnetism and Astral Light. Magnetism is a force analogous to that of the ordinary magnet, permeating the entirety of nature. Its fundamental characteristics are attraction, repulsion, and a balanced polarization. Science readily acknowledges celestial and mineral magnetism. Animal magnetism manifests daily through phenomena that science is unable to deny. Nevertheless, it regards them with mistrust, rightly withholding its admission until analysis can be supplemented by an incontrovertible synthesis. It is widely recognized that the magnetic state induced by animal magnetism precipitates an extraordinary slumber, during which the soul of the magnetized subject falls entirely under the domination of the magnetizer, possessing the peculiar trait that the sleeper appears to vacate his own existence and exhibits exclusively those phenomena that pertain to the universal life. He reflects the thoughts of others, sees without the use of his eyes, visits all locations without any constraint of space, perceives forms far more acutely than colors, compresses or conflates periods of time, speaks of the future as though it were the past and of the past as though it were yet to unfold, divulges the magnetizer's innermost thoughts, even the secret murmurs of his conscience, summons into memory the very individuals upon whom the magnetizer is reflecting and describes them in the most meticulous detail, even though the clairvoyant has never beheld them, articulates the language of science like a scholar and that of the imagination like a poet, diagnoses maladies and prescribes their remedies, frequently imparts sagacious counsel, suffers alongside those who suffer, and occasionally weeps bitterly in advance when foretelling the distress that is destined to occur. These peculiar yet incontrovertible facts lead us to the necessary conclusion that there exists a common life shared by all souls, or, at the very least, a universal mirror for every imagination and every memory, wherein it is possible for us to gaze upon one another like a multitude congregated before a looking-glass. This reflector is the odic light of Baron Reichenbach, which we designate as the astral light, and it serves as the great agency of life termed OD, and hour by the Hebrews. Magnetism directed by the will of the operator is OD, that of passive clairvoyance is OB. The Pythonesses of antiquity were clairvoyants intoxicated by the passive astral light. This illumination is referred to as the spirit of Python within our sacred texts. For in Greek mythology, the serpent Python serves as its allegorical representation. In its dual action, it is further symbolized by the serpents of the caduceus. The right-hand serpent is OD, the one on the left is Ob, and, in the center, at the pinnacle of the hermetic staff, shines the golden globe which represents hour or light in equilibrium. OD represents life governed by free choice. Ob represents life dictated by fate. It is for this reason that the Hebrew lawgiver proclaimed, "Woe unto those who divine by Ob, because they invoke fate, which constitutes an offense against both the providence of God and the liberty of man." To be sure, there is a profound distinction between the serpent Python, which slithered through the primordial mire of the deluge and was slain by the sun's arrows, and the serpent that coils about the rod of Aesculapius, just as the tempting serpent of Eden differs from the brazen serpent that healed those poisoned in the desert. These two antagonistic serpents truly symbolize those contrary forces that may be conjoined, yet must never be conflated. Hermes' scepter, while keeping them apart, simultaneously reconciles them, and even unites them after a fashion. Thus it is how, beneath the penetrating gaze of science, harmony emerges from the analogy of contraries. Necessity and liberty, these are the two great laws of life. And strictly speaking, these two laws constitute but one, for both are indispensable. Necessity devoid of liberty would prove fatalistic, just as liberty lacking its requisite constraints would descend into madness. Privilege without obligation is folly, and obligation without privilege is slavery. The entire secret of magnetism resides herein, to govern the fatality of the OB through intelligence and the power of the OD, thereby forging the perfect equilibrium of hour. When an unbalanced magnetizer, who has been rendered a slave to fate by the passions that subjugate him, attempts to manipulate the light of fatality, he resembles a blindfolded man astride a blind horse, endeavoring to spur the beast into a gallop through a forest fraught with winding trails and precipitous cliffs. Fortune-tellers, cartomancers, and clairvoyants are, without exception, subjects of hallucination who formulate their predictions by means of the OB. The glass of water in hydromancy, the tarot of Attila, the lines of the palm, etc., induce a species of hypnotism within the seer. Thus, he regards his consultant through the reflection of his own foolish desires or avaricious imaginations, and because he is himself a spirit devoid of dignity or nobility of will, he divines his client's follies and suggests even graver ones, which he considers integral to his success. A cartomancer who counseled honesty and upright behavior would swiftly lose his clientele of kept women and hysterical spinsters. The two magnetic lights may be distinguished thus: one the living light and the other the dead light, one the astral fluid and the other the spectral phosphorus, one the torch of discourse and the other the smoke of dreams. To magnetize without peril, it is essential to possess the light of life within oneself. That is to say, one must be both wise and righteous. A man who is enslaved by his passions does not magnetize, he fascinates. Yet, in radiating this fascination, he merely widens the dizzying circle around himself. He multiplies his bewitchments and progressively saps his own willpower. He is akin to a spider that exhausts itself and is ultimately ensnared within its own web. Humanity has not yet recognized the supreme rule of reason, even today. The masses mistake it for the individual's personal, and almost invariably erroneous, rationalizations. However, Monsieur de la Palisse himself would instruct them that he who deceives himself is not a man of reason, for reason is precisely the exact antithesis of our errors. Those individuals and multitudes who are not governed by reason are the slaves of fate. Fate dictates public opinion, and opinion is the queen of the world. Men desire to be dominated, pacified, and led astray. Their basest cravings appear more beautiful to them than virtues do, and those whom they hail as great men are frequently the greatest fools. The cynicism of Diogenes pleases them as much as the charlatanism of Empedocles. There would be none they would admire quite so much as Ajax and Capaneus, had Polyeucte not proved more unbridled still. Pyramus and Thisbe, who took their own lives, are esteemed as the model lovers. The author of a paradox is perpetually assured of making his name. And though the world in its spite and envy has tried in vain to consign the name of Erostratus to oblivion, this name is so anomalous that it survives through their very anger and imprints itself eternally upon their memory. The foolish, then, are magnetizers or rather fascinators, and it is this quality that renders their folly contagious. Because they have failed to measure true greatness, the populace becomes captivated by the exotic. Children who have not yet learned to walk demand to be lifted and carried about. None cherish unbridled behavior quite so much as the impotent do. It is their very incapacity for pleasure that forges characters such as Tiberius and Messalina. The Parisian street urchin within his paradise upon the boulevards aspires to be a bandit, and laughs uproariously upon seeing Telemachus ridiculed. Not everyone shares the inclinations of drug addicts or alcoholics, yet nearly everyone desires to elevate his spirit, and would be content enough if his heart embarked upon an excursion. When Christianity imposed itself upon the world through the fascination of martyrdom, a great writer of that epoch articulated the thoughts of all when he declared, "Believe because it is irrational." The foolishness of the cross, as St. Paul himself termed it, was then upon its invincible march. The books of the adepts were cast into the flames, and St. Paul at Ephesus served as a prelude to the exploits of Omar. The temples, which had once stood as wonders of the world, were demolished, alongside the idols that had been artistic masterpieces. Humanity developed an appetite for death, seeking to despoil its transient existence of all adornments so that it might withdraw from life entirely. A distaste for reality invariably accompanies a love of dreams. "How vile the earth is while I gaze at the heaven," said a renowned mystic. This signifies, quite literally, how sordid the earth becomes when I gaze upon the sky. How so? Does your nurse, the earth, become soiled merely because your gaze loses itself in the expanse of space? What, then, is the earth if not a celestial body? Perhaps she is sullied because she is burdened with carrying you upon her? Undoubtedly, were you to be transported to the sun, it would soon appear tarnished to your fastidious eye. Would the heavens be a superior realm if they were utterly empty? Is it not precisely the case that the sky is so wondrous to behold because it illuminates the earth by day and, by night, resplends with a countless multitude of earths and suns? What? The splendid earth, the earth of immense oceans, the earth so abundantly replete with trees and flowers becomes mere filth to you simply because you yearn to be launched into the void. Believe me, you need not travel far to achieve such an end. The void already resides within your spirit and your heart. It is the infatuation with dreams that introduces so much suffering into the dreams of love. Love, as nature bestows it upon us, is a delightful reality, yet our morbid pride seeks something superior to nature. Hence arises the hysterical mania of the misunderstood. The thought of Charlotte within the mind of Werther is fatally transformed, as is tragically inevitable, into the shape of a pistol bullet. The culmination of preposterous love is suicide. True love, natural love, is the miracle of magnetism. It is the intertwining of the two serpents upon the caduceus. Its generation may appear fated, but it is brought into existence by the supreme reason, which engenders it in accordance with natural laws. It is fabled that Tiresias incurred the wrath of Venus for separating two serpents who were copulating, and became a hermaphrodite, which neutralized his sexual potency. Subsequently, the irate goddess struck him once more, blinding him, because he had claimed on behalf of women that which was predominantly the prerogative of men. Tiresias was a soothsayer who prophesied by means of the dead light. His predictions, furthermore, heralded misfortunes, and invariably appeared to be precipitated by misfortunes. This allegory encapsulates the entirety of the philosophy of magnetism that we have just revealed. Chapter 2. The nature of evil and disorder. Evil, insofar as it exists, is the affirmation of disorder. Now, in the presence of the eternal order, disorder is fundamentally transitory. In the presence of the absolute order, which constitutes the will of God, disorder remains merely relative. Consequently, the absolute affirmation of disorder and evil is, at its core, a falsehood. The absolute affirmation of evil equates to the denial of God, given that God is the supreme and absolute source of goodness. Evil is the denial of reason within the philosophical realm. It is the repudiation of responsibility within the social sphere. It is the opposition to the inviolable laws of nature within the physical domain. Suffering is not an evil. It is the consequence and almost invariably the remedy of evil. Nothing that is naturally inevitable can conceivably be deemed an evil. Winter, night, and death are not evils. They are the natural transitions from one day to the next, from autumn to spring, and from one life to another life. Proudhon has asserted that God is what is evil, which is tantamount to declaring, God is the devil, since the devil is conventionally regarded as the spirit of evil. Should we reverse the proposition, we arrive at this paradoxical formula. The devil is God, or in other words, evil is God. Yet, naturally, in speaking thus, the sovereign of logicians whom we have quoted was not attempting to designate the hypothetical personification of good under the appellation of God. Rather, he was envisioning an impossible divinity imagined by mankind, and we must concede that he was correct in elucidating his thoughts in this manner, for the devil is but a caricature of God, and that which we term evil is simply good, inadequately defined and poorly understood. We would not know how to love evil for the sake of evil, nor disorder for the sake of disorder. The infringement of laws pleases us merely because it appears to elevate us above the law itself. Men were not made for the law, but the law has been made for men, to paraphrase the maxim of Jesus that the priests of his era deemed so subversive and impious, a declaration that human pride could abuse most monstrously. Should someone assert to us that God possesses rights but not responsibilities because he is mightier than we are, we maintain that this is the very definition of an impious statement. Such a person might even dare to add that God is everything to us, but we are nothing to him, whereas the precise opposite is true. God, who is infinitely greater than we are, contracted an infinite debt by bringing us into the world. He has excavated the abyss of human frailty which he alone can fill in. The absurd baseness of tyranny in the ancient world has bequeathed unto us the phantom of a God who is both absurd and cruel, one who would enact an eternal miracle merely to compel a finite being to endure infinite sufferings. Let us hypothesize for a moment that one among us had been capable of creating an ephemeral being and had said to it, without its being able to hear it, "My creature, worship me." The pitiful little entity scurries about devoid of a single thought in its head. When its brief day concludes and it perishes, a necromancer informs the man that by pouring but a drop of his blood upon it, he can resurrect the ephemeral creature. The man takes offense. I would do the same were I in his stead. Here is the resuscitated creature. What, then, is the man to do? I will tell you what he will do, exclaims a fanatical believer. Seeing that the creature in its former life lacked the wit to adore him, he will ignite a terrifying brazier and hurl the creature into it, regretting only that he lacks the power to preserve its life miraculously amidst the flames, so that it will burn eternally. We know that everyone will protest that nowhere could such a mad fool be found as base or as wicked as that. Please forgive me, some among you Christians, the man in question certainly does not exist, of that I am entirely convinced. Yet there does exist, solely within your imagination I hasten to add, a being most cruel and base. It is your conception of God, precisely as you explain him, and it is regarding this very conception that Proudhon had a thousandfold justification for stating, God is evil. In this sense, evil would merely be the deceitful affirmation of a malevolent God, and it is such a deity who would be the devil or an entity akin to him. A religion that offered such a balm for the afflictions of humanity would only poison it instead of curing it. Spirits would be brutalized and consciences would become depraved, and the propaganda disseminated in the name of such a God could aptly be termed the evil magnetism. The consequence of falsehood is injustice, and from injustice flows the iniquity that incites anarchy in states and in individuals, disintegration and death. A lie cannot exist without evoking within the dead light a sort of spectral verity, and all the liars in life deceive themselves first and foremost by mistaking night for day. The anarchist believes he is free, the thief believes he is clever, the libertine believes he is finding enjoyment, the dictator believes that oppression is governance. What is required to eradicate evil from the earth? Something that appears exceedingly simple, the enlightenment of the foolish and the vicious. Yet here all goodwill fails and all efforts founder. The vicious and the foolish harbor no desire to be enlightened. We have collided with that secret perversity which appears to be the root of the affliction, the relish for disorder and the attachment to error. It is our conviction that this perversity is not genuinely something freely accepted and desired, but is nothing other than the poisoning of the will by the deleterious force of error. The air we breathe consists, as you are aware, of oxygen and nitrogen. Oxygen corresponds to the light of life, and nitrogen to the light of death. A man plunged into nitrogen would be unable to respire or survive. Similarly, a man who has been asphyxiated by the spectral light is no longer capable of acting upon his own free will. The great phenomenon of light does not occur within the atmosphere, but rather within eyes that have been formed to perceive it. One day, a philosopher of the positivist school, Monsieur Littre, if my memory serves me well, declared that infinity is nothing more than an endless night punctuated here and there by a star or two. This holds true, one might argue, for our eyes, which were not designed to perceive any radiance other than the light of the sun. Yet, does not the very concept of this light appear to us in dreams, while the earth is shrouded in night and our eyes remain closed? What is the day that belongs to souls? How does one perceive by means of thought? Would the night known to our eyes exist for eyes constructed in a different manner? Furthermore, if our eyes were non-existent, would we possess any awareness of the night? To the blind, there are neither stars nor sun, and if we blindfold ourselves, we become voluntarily blind. The perversity of the senses, much like that of the faculties of the soul, results from an accident or from some initial transgression against the laws of nature. It subsequently becomes inevitable and assumes the appearance of fate. What is to be done with the blind? They must be taken by the hand and led. But what if they refuse to be led? Guardrails must be erected. But suppose they dismantle them? In that case, they are not merely blind, but dangerous lunatics, and the most prudent course is to allow them to perish if they cannot be confined. Edgar Allan Poe recounts an amusing tale of an asylum where the inmates managed to overpower the attendants and keepers, locking them within their own padded cells after disguising them as wild beasts. There they remain, celebrating their victory in their physicians' chambers, consuming the infirmary's wine, and congratulating one another on having made such splendid recoveries. While they are carousing, Their prisoners break their chains and rush upon them with flailing batons. They have been infuriated by the unfortunate madman and avenge themselves, after a fashion, through senseless abuse. Herein lies the story of modern revolutions. The feeble-minded triumphing by sheer weight of numbers, in other words, the so-called masses, imprison the wise and assert that the latter are no better than wild beasts. Before long, the prisons fall into disrepair and collapse. The wise men of today, driven to extremes by their sufferings, escape howling and spreading terror all around. An attempt was made to impose a false deity upon the people, and they consequently bellow that there is no God at all. Subsequently, the apathetic, emboldened by fear, form a coalition to quell these frantic half-wits and inaugurate the rule of imbeciles. We have already witnessed this occurrence. To what extent men are responsible for the violent fluctuations and agonies that generate so many crimes would puzzle any thinker to articulate. Marat is execrated, and Pius V is canonized. It is true that the fearsome Ghislieri did not guillotine his opponents. He burned them to death. Pius V was a severe man and a staunch Catholic. Marat carried his impartiality to the point of wretchedness. Both men firmly believed in their actions, yet they were homicidal fools even if they were not homicidal maniacs. Now, when a criminal folly secures the complicity of the populace, it almost assumes the status of a terrible right. And when the mob, having not been undeceived but merely led astray in a different manner, disowns and abandons its hero, the vanquished becomes simultaneously a scapegoat and a martyr. The death of Robespierre is as noble as that of Louis XVI. I genuinely admire that fearsome inquisitor who, upon being assassinated by the Albigenses, inscribed upon the ground with his own blood before expiring, "I believe in one God. Is war an evil? Yes, undeniably, for it is horrific. But is it an absolute evil? War is the travail accompanying the birth of nations and civilizations. Who is responsible for war? Are men? No, for they are its victims. Who then? No one would be rash enough to attribute it to Providence, save perhaps Count Joseph de Maistre, with his theories regarding why priests have historically consecrated the sword, and how a mystical air has invariably been associated with the bloody office of the executioner. Evil is the shadow, the very foil of good. To push this argument too far would imply that it is a negative good. Evil, then, is the resistance that validates the effort of good. Hence why Jesus Christ was not afraid to declare, "It must needs be that scandals should come. There are monsters in nature, just as there are typographical errors in a fine book." What does this demonstrate? It demonstrates that both nature and the printing press are blind instruments directed by intelligence. Yet, you may argue, a competent overseer will correct his proofs. Indeed, and in nature, this constitutes the very purpose of progress. God, if I may be permitted the comparison, is akin to the head of the printing works, and man is his overseer in the composing room. Priests have eternally preached that scourges are born of human sins, and they are correct, for science has been bestowed upon man to foresee and prevent such afflictions. If, as is claimed, cholera arises from the corpses piled up at the mouths of the Ganges, if famine stems from the hoarding of provisions, if plague is bred by squalor, and if war is so frequently precipitated by the foolish pride of kings and the unruliness of populations, is it not, in truth, the wickedness, or rather the sheer folly, of mankind that causes such scourges? There is a common expression that ideas are in the air, and one might truthfully add that vices reside there as well. All corruption engenders putrefaction, and every state of putrefaction possesses its own identifiable stench. The atmosphere that envelopes the sick is unhealthy, and the moral plague generates its own atmosphere, which is vastly more contagious. An honest heart feels at ease in the company of virtuous men, but it is oppressed, it suffers, and it is stifled when surrounded by the vicious. Chapter 3. The Influence of Sleep and Dreams. In his treatise on the perpetual motion of souls, the Grand Rabbi Isaac Luria posits that one must exercise special care during the hour preceding sleep. In fact, the soul relinquishes its individual life for a time during sleep, immersing itself in the universal light which, as we have previously stated, manifests as two opposing currents. The slumbering entity either yields to the embraces of the serpent of Aesculapius, the vital and regenerating serpent, or succumbs to the poisoned coils of the hideous python. To sleep is to bathe in the light of life, or in the phosphorescent glow of death. He who retires to sleep with thoughts of justice steeps himself in the merits of the righteous. However, he who prepares for slumber with his mind consumed by hatred or falsehoods wallows in a dead sea, absorbing the contagion of the wicked. Night is akin to the winter season, which incubates and prepares the seeds. If we have sown tares, we shall not harvest wheat. He who settles into sleep in a spirit of irreverence shall not awaken in the presence of the divine blessing. It is said that night brings counsel. Undoubtedly so, good counsel to the just, and baneful impulses to the unjust. These are the teachings of Rabbi Isaac Luria. We do not know to what extent one ought to concede this reciprocal influence among beings plunged in sleep, governed in some fashion by involuntary attractions, such that the good elevate the good, and the wicked further degrade those who resemble them. It would be far more comforting to believe that the noble nature of the just radiates upon the wicked to soothe them, and that the restiveness of the wicked cannot tarnish the soul of the just. What remains certain is that evil thoughts disturb one's sleep, consequently rendering it unwholesome, and that a clear conscience works wonders in refreshing and resting the blood throughout the night. At the same time, it is highly probable that the magnetic radiation which has been established throughout the day by habit and volition does not cease during the night. This is evidenced by the fact that our dreams often serve as the stage upon which we enact our most clandestine desires. Only he, asserts St. Augustine, has truly attained the virtue of chastity who imposes modesty even upon his dreams. All the stars are magnetic, and all celestial magnets act and react upon one another within the planetary systems, across the universes and throughout infinity. The same principle holds true for the beings inhabiting the earth. The nature and potency of these magnets are determined by the reciprocal influence of their forms upon the force and of the force upon their forms. It is imperative to examine and meditate upon this matter with profound attention. That beauty which constitutes the harmony of forms is invariably associated with a tremendous power of attraction. However, there exist doubtful and debatable beauties. There are conventional beauties that align with particular tastes and specific passions. It was observed at the court of Louis XV that the Venus de Milo possessed a broad waist and large feet. In the East, the Sultan's concubines are corpulent and, in the kingdom of Siam, women are purchased by weight. Men are prepared to perpetrate follies for the beauty that subjugates them, whether such beauty be real or imaginary. Thus it is forms, then, which intoxicate us and exercise the dominion of fatal forces over our better judgment. When our tastes grow depraved, we become enamored with certain illusory beauties which are truly grotesque. As the Romans descended into decadence, they became captivated by the low brow and frog-like eyes of Messalina. In this terrestrial realm, everyone constructs his own conception of paradise. Yet herein lies the mechanism of justice. The paradise of depraved creatures is perpetually and inevitably a hell. It is the intent of the will which determines the value of deeds, because it is the will which establishes the objective one sets for oneself, and it is invariably the goal desired and attained which governs the character of one's works. It is according to our works that God shall judge us, as the evangelist proclaims, and not according to our deeds. Our deeds prepare, initiate, sustain, and consummate our works. They are virtuous when the work is virtuous, and wicked when it is wicked. We harbor no desire to assert that the end justifies the means, merely that a worthy end necessitates worthy means and imparts a degree of merit to actions of the most indifferent nature. One performs or causes to be performed that of which one approves because one encourages it. If your rule of conduct is fallacious, if your aims are iniquitous, all those who share your mindset will behave precisely as you would behave in their stead. And when they succeed, you will deem they have done well. If your actions appear to be those of an honorable man, whilst your intentions remain those of a scoundrel, your actions inherently become wicked. The prayers of the hypocrite are more impious than the blasphemies of the miscreant. To summarize, everything which promotes injustice is unjust. Everything one undertakes for the sake of justice is just and good. We have previously established that human beings are magnets which act upon one another. This magnetism, which is natural at first, but is afterwards settled in a mode determined by the habits of the will, groups mankind into phalanxes and series far more profoundly perhaps than Fourier ever imagined. Nevertheless, it is accurate to concur with him that attractions are proportional to destinies, but he erred when he failed to differentiate between inevitable attractions and artificial ones. He furthermore believed that criminals are merely misunderstood by society, whereas on the contrary it is they who fail to comprehend society and possess no intention of doing so. What would he have done within his phalanstery with individuals whose attraction, proportional to their destiny according to his theory, had disrupted and threatened to disintegrate the phalanstery itself? In our volume entitled The Science of Spirits, we have established the traditional Kabbalistic classification of benevolent and malevolent spirits. Superficial readers may well have inquired, why employ these names rather than others? What spirit descending from the heavens, or what soul ascending from the abyss, has been capable of revealing these hierarchical secrets of the world beyond? All of this is naught but the height of fantasy. Yet, in asserting this, such readers would be profoundly mistaken. This classification is by no means arbitrary, and if we postulate the existence of particular spirits in the hereafter, it is because they most unequivocally reside there. Anarchy, presumption, obscurantism, fraud, hatred and iniquity are arrayed against wise conduct, authority, intelligence, honor, benevolence, and justice. The Hebrew designations Kether, Chakma, Bina, the names Thamiel, Chagidal, Sat-Ariel, etc., opposed to the names Hageth Hakadosh, Ophanim, Eralim, etc., signify precisely this. The same holds true for all the vital words and obscure terms of any dogma, be it ancient or modern. In the final analysis, they enshrine the principles of eternal and incorruptible reason. It is evident, indeed certain, that the masses are not yet ripe for the reign of reason, and that the greatest fools or the most deceitful knaves among them repeatedly mislead the populace with blind creeds. Comparing folly to folly, I discern more genuine socialism in Loyola than I do in Proudhon. Proudhon posits that atheism is an article of faith, the most pernicious of all, admittedly, which is precisely why he has adopted it. He asserts that God is malevolent, that the social order is anarchy, that property is theft. What society could possibly endure upon such principles? The Society of Jesus is established upon diametrically opposed principles. Call them opposed errors if you will, and for centuries now it has maintained its stature and remains robust enough to withstand the partisans of anarchy for years to come. It may not possess perfect equilibrium, it is true, but it nevertheless knows how to place heavier weights upon the scales than does our friend Proudhon. Men are far more united in malevolence than they dare to imagine. Proudhon forged Vuillet into the man he became. Those who ignited the faggots at Constance shall have to answer before God for the massacres of Jean Ziska. The Protestants bear responsibility for the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day because they previously slit the throats of the Catholics. Perhaps in reality it was Marat who slew Robespierre, just as it was Charlotte Corday who brought about the execution of her friends the Girondins. Madame Dubarry, dragged to the national abattoir like a slaughterhouse beast lowing and recalcitrant, undoubtedly harbored no thought that she was paying the penalty for the tortures inflicted under Louis XVI. For often our most egregious crimes are those of which we remain completely oblivious. When Marat declared that one task of humanity is to let a little blood to prevent a far greater hemorrhage still, from whom do you suppose he borrowed this maxim? From the mild and pious Fenelon. Not long ago the previously unpublished correspondence of Madame Elizabeth was printed and, in one of these letters, the angelic princess declares that all is lost unless the king summons the courage to sever 3 heads. Whose? She does not specify, perhaps those of Philippe d'Orléans, of Lafayette and of Mirabeau. A prince of her own lineage, a worthy gentleman and a great man. It matters little. The gentle princess desired 3 heads. Later on Marat demanded 300,000. Between the angel and the demon there is solely a difference of a few zeros. Chapter 4. The Magnetic Chain and Original Sin. The coiling of the serpents about the caduceus signifies the formation of a chain. This chain manifests in 2 distinct forms: the linear form and the circular form. Originating from the identical center, it intersects innumerable circumferences by innumerable radii. The linear chain is the chain of transmission. The circular chain is the chain of participation, of diffusion, of communion, of religion. In this manner is formed that grand wheel, composed of multiple wheels turning one within another, which flashes upon us from the vision of Ezekiel. The chain of transmission establishes a profound solidarity across successive generations. The central point is white upon one side and black upon the other. The black serpent is affixed to the darkened side, and the white serpent is bound to the luminous side. This central point represents original free will, and upon its dark aspect commences original sin. The current of destiny emanates from the dark side, whereas the conscious choice of movement is tethered to the white side. Allegorically, this central fulcrum may be depicted by the moon, and the twin forces by 2 women, one radiant and the other shadowed. The dark woman embodies the fallen Eve. She is the passive manifestation, the infernal Hecate who bears the lunar crescent upon her brow. The white woman is Maya or Maria, who treads underfoot both the crescent moon and the head of the black serpent. It is impossible to articulate the matter more lucidly, for we have laid our hands upon the very cradle of all dogmas. They have reverted to their infancy before our very eyes, and we are wary lest we inflict harm upon them. The doctrine of original sin, in whatever manner it may be interpreted, presupposes the pre-existence of our souls, if not possessing their own individualized life, then at least dwelling within the universal life. Now, if one is capable of sinning unwittingly within the universal life, one must inevitably be saved in the same manner. Yet this remains a profound mystery. The straight chain, the spoke of the wheel, the chain of transmission, engenders an intrinsic solidarity among the generations, ensuring that fathers are punished in their children, so that through the suffering of the offspring, the fathers might stand a chance of salvation. The scriptures proclaim that Christ descended into hell and, having shattered the iron locks and the gates of brass, ascended into heaven, leading captivity captive. And the universal life cried out, "Hosanna! For he has eradicated the sting of death." What is the true meaning of all this? Dare one elucidate it? Will you possess the capacity to divine or comprehend it? The ancient hierophants of Greece possessed an alternative method of depicting these dual forces symbolized by the two serpents. They visualized them as two infants wrestling with one another while holding a globe between their feet and knees. These two children represent Eros and Anteros, Cupid and Hermes, foolish love and wise love, and their perpetual conflict sustains the equilibrium of the world. Should one reject the notion that we may have possessed some personal existence prior to our terrestrial birth, original sin must then be regarded as a voluntary corruption of human magnetism by our first parents, who would have fractured the equilibrium of the chain by conceding a fatal predominance to the black serpent, that is to say, the astral current of the lifeless realm, and we suffer the repercussions, much like children born with infirmities owing to the vices of their forebears, enduring the penalty for transgressions they themselves did not commit. The excruciating agonies of Jesus and the martyrs, alongside the severe penances of the saints, were intended as a counterbalance to this profound disequilibrium. A disruption so irreparable, it must be added, that the world is destined one day to be consumed by fire. Grace would be symbolized by the dove and the lamb, the astral current of life imbued with the merits of the Redeemer or the saints. The devil or tempter would signify the astral current of death, the black serpent tainted by all the iniquities of mankind, scaled with their malevolent thoughts, and laden with the venom of their sinful desires. In other words, the magnetism of evil. Thus, an unceasing conflict is waged between good and evil. They remain forever irreconcilable. Consequently, evil is perpetually damned, eternally condemned to the torments attendant upon disorder. And yet, from our very childhood it ceases not to entice us and to lure us to its side. Everything that mystical poetry imparts concerning King Satan is perfectly explicated by this dreadful magnetism, which is all the more formidable because it is more fatal. Yet it need not be deeply feared by virtue, which it can never overtake and which, by the grace of God, will unfailingly withstand it. Chapter 5. The Harmony of Science and Faith. We have established that the phenomenon of physical light manifests and occurs exclusively within the eyes that perceive it. That is to say, visibility holds no existence for us absent the faculty of vision. The same principle applies to intellectual light. It exists solely for those intelligences endowed with the capacity to behold it. It is that interior illumination for lack of which there remains naught but the outer darkness, where, according to the words of Christ, there is and forever shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. The adversaries of truth resemble delinquent children, overturning and extinguishing all the lamps, simply because they find it easier to shriek and wail in the dark. Truth is so inextricably bound to that which is good that every wicked deed, freely consented to and executed without a pang of conscience, extinguishes the light of our soul and banishes us into the outer darkness. This constitutes the very essence of mortal sin. The sinner is epitomized in ancient fable by Oedipus, who, having slain his father and defiled his mother, ultimately blinded himself. Knowledge is the father of human intelligence, and faith is its mother. There were two trees in the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. It is knowledge that ought to and can fertilize faith. Otherwise, she exhausts herself with monstrous abortions and brings forth nothing but phantoms. Faith is what ought to be the reward of knowledge and the ultimate objective for which he strives. Devoid of her, he ultimately doubts himself, becomes profoundly demoralized, and swiftly succumbs to despair. Thus, the believers on the one hand, who disdain science and misconstrue nature, and the scientists on the other, who deride, reject, and seek to obliterate faith, are alike enemies of the light and rush forth to battle one another in the outer darkness, where Proudhon and Vuillet alternately raise their voices in a manner that sounds worse than tears, and proceed to grind their teeth. True faith cannot conceivably conflict with true science. Furthermore, any interpretation of dogma that science proves to be erroneous must be repudiated by faith. We no longer reside in an era where it is fashionable to declare, "I believe it because it surpasses reason." Today we must assert, "I believe because it would be irrational not to do so. I believe because it is absurd to remain in disbelief." Science and faith are not two engines of war set upon a collision course. They are the two pillars destined to uphold the pediment of the temple of peace. It is imperative to purify the gold of the sanctuary, which has so frequently been tarnished by the grime of priestcraft. Christ declared, "The words of the doctrine are spirit and life, the letter counts for naught." He further stated, "Judge not that ye be not judged, for with whatsoever judgment ye judge ye shall be judged, and as ye measure so shall it be meted out unto you." What a magnificent panegyric to the wisdom of reasonable doubt, and what a profound proclamation of the liberty of conscience. Indeed, one truth will be evident to anyone willing to heed the voice of reason. If there exists a strict law applicable to all mankind, without the observance of which salvation is impossible, this law must be promulgated in such a manner as to leave no individual in doubt of its decree. In such a context, the mere possibility of doubt constitutes a formal negation, and should a single man be left in ignorance of such a law, that law could not be deemed divine. There are no two distinct methods of being an honorable man, and does religion hold less significance than probity? Assuredly not, and this is precisely why there has never been but a single religion in the world. Schisms are merely superficial appearances. It is the fanaticism of the ignorant, who mutually condemn one another, that has always proven irreligious and abhorrent. The true religion is the universal religion. This is the reason Catholicism has adopted the only name that signifies the truth. Furthermore, this religion preserves orthodoxy in doctrine, the hierarchy of powers, the efficacy of worship, and the genuine magic of ceremonies. In other words, it is the archetypal and normative religion, the mother religion to which the Mosaic traditions and the ancient oracles of Hermes rightfully belong. In upholding this truth, even in the face of the Pope himself should it be necessary, we shall prove more Catholic than the Pope and more Protestant than Luther when the occasion demands. True religion is, above all else, the inner light, and religious forms frequently multiply and gleam with a spectral phosphorescence residing in the outer darkness. Nevertheless, it is imperative to respect the form, even for the sake of those souls who fail to comprehend the spirit. Science cannot, and indeed must not, exact reprisals against ignorance. Fanaticism remains ignorant as to why faith is entirely reasonable, while reason, recognizing the essential nature of religion, possesses a consummate understanding of how and why superstition is erroneous. The entirety of the Christian and Catholic religion rests upon the doctrine of grace, which is to say, of a freely bestowed gift. Freely you have received, freely give, as St. Paul declares. Religion is fundamentally a charitable institution. The Church stands as a sanctuary for the outcasts of philosophy. We may depart from her, yet we must never assail her. The impoverished who subsist without public assistance have not thereby earned the right to disparage it. The individual who lives uprightly without religion deprives himself of profound support, yet he does not thereby set himself against God. Freely offered gifts are not supplanted by punishments should we decline them, and God is not a usurer who compels men to pay interest upon that which they have not borrowed. Humanity requires religion, but religion does not require humanity. Those who do not acknowledge the law, St. Paul observes, shall be judged without the law. Here, he is not referring to natural law, but rather to religious law, or, to be more precise, to sacerdotal ordinances. Beyond these truths, so benign and pure, there exists nothing but that outer darkness wherein wail those whom a misconstrued religion cannot console, and where sectarians, mistaking hatred for love, gnash their teeth at one another. One day, Saint Teresa had a profound vision. It appeared to her that she had descended into hell and was immured within colossal walls, which were closing in upon her in a vain attempt to suffocate her. These walls were entirely tangible and have frequently led us to ponder Christ's menacing declaration regarding the outer darkness. Imagine a soul that, through an abhorrence of the light, has blinded itself like Oedipus. It has resisted all the enchantments of existence and has consistently repulsed life just as it has repulsed light. Here it remains, hurled beyond the influence of the worlds and the brilliance of the suns. It is utterly alone in the immense obscurity, where it must dwell by itself, and with the other willfully blind souls who resemble it, for all eternity. It is fixed within the shadow and suffers an eternal suffocation in the night. To this soul, it seems that everything has been obliterated save its own agonies, which alone could fill infinity. What profound misery! To have possessed the capacity for understanding, yet to have persisted in the idiocy of a senseless creed. To have been capable of love, only to have allowed the heart to wither. Oh, for merely an hour, or even a single minute, of the most imperfect pleasures or the most fleeting loves, for just a little air, a little sun, or even the moonlight and dancing upon the green, a drop of life or less than a drop, a tear, and an implacable eternity replies, "What is this talk of tears? You cannot even cry. Tears are the dew of life and the effusion of the sap of love. You have exiled yourself within your own egotism and walled yourself up in death. Ah! You sought to be holier than God. Ah! You spat in the face of your mother, the chaste and divine nature. Ah, you have spoken ill of science, of intelligence, and of progress. You believed that eternal life meant assuming the visage of a corpse and desiccating oneself like a mummy. Now you are precisely what you have. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.